What if the challenges you are facing right now are not just obstacles, but also opportunities for growth and self-discovery? This personal reframe is for you. You're listening to or watching the Sedona Soul Sister Show, where we share psychic guidance and healing for embodied spiritual awakening. I'm Christel, and I'm on a mission to support spiritual practitioners to access intuition, unlock your psychic gifts, and live your purpose. A big thanks to our listeners all over the world, and a special shout out and boost of love to our listeners in Brisbane, Australia. You can schedule sessions in West Sedona or virtually for psychic readings, mediumship, angel readings, starseed readings, sound healing, yoga, meditation, Reiki, and more at SedonaSoulSisters.com. It's time to repair the healing web on planet Earth. The personal power reframe that we're working with today is, what if this is happening for me? And it is important to pose it as a question, because then our minds, especially our subconscious mind, gets curious about the question and it seeks to find the answer in our environment and our own experience. And so, what if this is happening for me instead of why is this happening to me? The question, why is this happening to me, is a way of landing in a victim state, in giving away our power, in collapsing into feeling powerless about navigating a challenging situation. The way to avoid toxic positivity is to validate the experience, validate the emotion. This is hard. Acknowledge that something is stressful, that it's challenging, that it's confronting, that it's exhausting. Acknowledge the feeling. Let the emotional energetic wave happen, to be in the experience and acknowledge what is happening, how it feels. If there has been a collapse of power, you find yourself feeling like the victim, why is this happening to me? Acknowledge that and reclaim your power. And that happens by regulating your nervous system and navigating the stress response of fight, flight, freeze, please, or collapse. Then get curious about what can happen next. Move into a state of what is possible from here. If there has been a state of collapse or feeling victimized by whatever is happening, jumping right to how is this happening for me can be too much of a stretch. If there has been an energetic or emotional or even a physical collapse, ask the question, what is possible from here? That is a more neutral question than how is this happening for me? That is from that state of how is this happening for me, it acknowledges the ability to see the good or see the possibility in a challenging situation. Or a step back from that is what is possible from here is more neutral. And then taking action from wherever you are. So there's core elements that are essential to be able to live and embody the question, what if this is happening for me? Or how is this happening for me? What is possible from here? Again, all of these questions engage our minds, especially the subconscious mind, to look for solutions, which is an incredibly powerful practice in all circumstances, is to ask the question and ask a neutral or empowering question instead of, why is this happening to me? Is a disempowering question, and you can feel that in your own experience. So looking for minimum neutral questions, and when you're in the possibility of that, looking for empowering questions. When something challenging is happening, it is so important to recognize the stress response and regulate your system, is to immediately begin taking actions to take care of your physical, emotional, mental experience so that you can move out of a state of fight or flight in the nervous system, which is reactive, instead of creating a response. When you have regulated the system, then you can also release resistance. The fight state of fighting what is takes an enormous amount of energy. So a core part of working with this reframe is regulating the nervous system, moving out of resistance to recognize this is what's happening. Fighting what's happening isn't going to help. It's going to take more energy. So being able to be with what is, embracing the experience, acknowledge the challenge, and look for opportunities, look for what's possible in this intense and challenging experience. Being able to reframe your perspective of an intense experience takes practice, and the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. And as we've talked about already, the important part is to not gaslight yourself or pretend it's not challenging. To recognize the challenge, to validate the experience, to regulate your nervous system, and then look to shift your perspective, to open your awareness for what is possible, which when we move out of the fight or flight state of the nervous system, when we're in a fight or flight state, the nervous system and the brain is literally just seeking to survive, which unless you are in a situation where you are literally fighting for your life, being able to regulate the nervous system and then make choices to respond to what is happening, to regain your power to say, okay, this has happened. Now, what actions am I going to do from here? How am I going to live through this experience so that it's not creating a downward spiral of challenge after challenge after challenge that is just going downward quickly with incredible momentum, neutralizing the downward energy of devastation as quickly as possible, and then to be able to shift the perspective to what is possible instead of being in this battle of what has happened. Then you're spending so much energy fighting what is, rather than utilizing the opportunity to create a new experience, to shift your perspective, and to reclaim your power to open pathways that may not be possible. You can use this self-inquiry practice of what if this is happening for me in regards to any challenge, from a something small to something epic, like a natural catastrophe or someone dying or an intense illness, yet working with smaller things at first to build up the muscles will make it easier when those big life-changing things happen, that you have already the practice of neutralizing first, then shifting back into your power to regain your ability to see what's possible and take aligned action from where you are, which takes an enormous amount of trust. And on the show, I talk so much about soul assignments and soul purpose and what our soul decided it wanted us to learn in coming into this life. And one of the key aspects of working with this reframe, what if this is happening for me, is recognizing the power to choose. That on a soul level, my soul thought this was a great idea, even though my human self thinks it's a dumb idea right now. Is seeing the power of soul lessons and trusting that there is gold to be mined from every challenging experience. And as I talked about at the beginning, making sure that you're not just putting frosting on poop and saying, my beloved dying is a good thing, because that is going to mess with you more than being honest about what's happening, being in the challenge, being in the truth of the emotions that are relevant. If my beloved had died, then it wouldn't be like I would immediately be able to answer the next day, how is this happening for me? It would be like, wow, this is a deep dive into the underworld, into incredible grief and loss and devastation. And as I've talked about in so many shows, to me, the huge spectrum of emotions are a palette with which to create each emotion, each experience is a frequency to create with. It is a stream of life force energy. Working with this perspective is where we gain power in navigating challenging experiences. Like in the example of losing one's beloved, how can I turn that experience into art that is not only giving me the experience of creating from a state of deep grief, but it keeps me in motion and in the experience of moving the energy rather than in collapse or fighting what is. An important part of being open to seeing what if this is happening for me is surrendering control. Personally, that the control mechanism for me was a huge part of navigating the trauma of my childhood, was trying to control my environment as much as possible, control the people that were around me, control in order to feel safe. Yet an important part of being in an obstacle, a challenge, a life-changing event is being able to surrender control. There's a huge difference between surrender and collapse. Surrendering control is moving out of the fight or flight state and moving into a state of embodied trust, surrendering the need to try to direct the experience or even direct my emotions for navigating this experience. Collapsing is moving into a state of feeling powerless, helpless, hopeless, which those emotions, having moments of feeling helpless, powerless, hopeless, if that is your authentic experience, then feel the feelings. Yet collapse is when there is a giving up and moving into a state of this is how it's going to be forever. Where surrender, there is an element of serenity in surrender. To be able to truly surrender, there is a willingness and a trust that the energy will shift, the experience will shift, that something greater is coming. There is some power in this experience. There is something good coming from this, rather than being in a state of fight or flight, or on the extreme of giving up, complete collapse, and the gravity of that experience of like, it is never going to change. Dun, dun, dun. I'm a super fan of playing with the characters. If you give embodied expression and give those parts a voice, give the emotions a voice, then things will change incredibly quickly. So I have a practice that I call divine play, which is about all of the emotions and expressions, is giving them, like thinking of a theater. I also call it the magical drama theater, where if you think about each emotion or each archetype that is within you as a character in your life story, if it was all just the skippy, happy-go-lucky, everything is perfect and fine, we've talked about this in many shows before, it's not real. That's not how it works. That's not how it works in stories. That's not how it happens in movies. That's not how it happens in our lives. There is a spectrum of experience, and giving these different emotions an embodied expression and a voice is a way to enjoy the play of challenging times. When I do this, most often I end up laughing hysterically, even if it's incredibly devastating, rather than being in the collapse and the resistance and falling into the belief of this is how it's going to be forever, I'm never going to feel better. It's like letting the drama queen have her moment in exploring each character, each emotion, being a character in the theater. I often like to think of like the old black and white movies before there was sound, and how dramatic it was and how played up the characters were, because there was no words. So it had to be acted out in a very dramatic way. And that I find entertaining, and being like, okay, most often We talked about this in the last several episodes, what I call VPR, or victim, perpetrator, rescuer, the trauma triangle. And knowing that in your own experience, most often, if it's just you battling this event that has happened, you're the victim, and the event that happened or the person that hurt you or whatever happened, they are the perpetrator, and you're looking desperately for the rescuer. In the emotional alchemy of exploring this, surrendering to the experience, truly embodying the emotions and playing out the characters, then things can shift incredibly and be more entertaining and fun in the process. My childhood was long before social media, so I'm going to play out a little scene here, which it's going to be more fun if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not, you can imagine. This is what we used to do when I was a kid, and it shows you the three different characters: the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer, which most often these are happening inside of ourselves. And it can be incredibly helpful to get to that state of surrender, to work with the magical drama theater or the divine play, to recognize which character or characters you're playing in your own experience, to be able to reclaim your power. Here goes the scene. I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent. I'll pay the rent. My hero. Foiled again. I never imagined that I would put that on YouTube for everyone to see. But anyway, the point in doing that is to highlight surrender and the play, the emotional alchemy that's possible in being able to recognize the emotional, the energetic dynamics that are happening in our own experience and with the people that we're in relationship with. Because that little scene plays out the three different roles: victim, perpetrator, rescuer. And that is a power over dynamic. It's a dysfunctional power dynamic. So being able to recognize that kind of power dynamic and stepping off the trauma triangle into a power with experience, which that is the fundamental core of what if this is happening for me. It is a personal power reframe that moves us out of a state of being the victim to hard things happening, which no one will escape, challenging things happening in human life. Being able to be in the experience of what if this is happening for me, or how is this happening for me, is so worlds different than why is this happening to me. And once we have worked with the emotional alchemy and embraced the challenge, acknowledged the challenge, reclaimed our power, worked with the emotional, mental, physical energy, and being in the state of uncertainty is an aspect of letting go of control, not only trying to control the moment, but to control the outcome, is being in the state of, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how I'm going to navigate this. But doing that from an empowered place, but being able to navigate the intensity, navigate the challenges from a place of openness, working with curiosity and surrender, and being in the uncertainty. Again, not bypassing or gaslighting yourself, recognizing, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do know that I want to take action from an empowered place. I do know that I want to be kind to myself in the process. I do know if it's a challenge that's happening with another person, I want the best for both of us. And that embracing uncertainty, but also turning your energy and attention onto the timeline that you desire, can be incredibly powerful. The little scene I acted out a few minutes ago, the villain is the one that is asking for the rent, when really that is just a legal agreement that was made. So in my generation, if that was something that you played out, there's a way of it is highlighting and glorifying a dysfunctional power dynamic instead of the one saying, I can't pay the rent, taking self-responsibility. And of course, it wouldn't be the catchy little scene that it was to be like, hey, I'm really sorry. I don't have the money to pay the rent right now. I'm doing my best to get things back on track. And I'm so sorry this is negatively impacting you. Right? This is self-responsibility. This is saying, I am not meeting my agreement and you are not the villain for asking me to meet my agreement. So how this plays into what if this is happening for me is taking responsibility for not only how I am acting in whatever is happening, it is taking responsibility if the obstacle or the challenge that has happened was my responsibility. If I made a mistake, if I didn't do something I said I was going to do, is being self-responsible for my own actions in whatever happened, if that is relevant, but also in being self-responsible in how I am navigating the opportunities, right? Being in a challenging situation, it isn't licensed to treat people poorly, right? So being self-responsible for whatever role I played in how the obstacle or the challenge happened, if I am responsible for it, but also in how I am navigating through the situation, is being responsible for myself and navigating my own emotions and getting into a better situation, which often means asking for help, asking for support, being honest about what is happening. Like I said, after I played out that little scene and what I just said a moment ago about saying, hey, I'm really sorry I don't have money to pay the rent. I'm sorry this is negatively impacting you. That is self-responsibility. And acknowledging that I am the one that is responsible for paying the rent and getting back on track. In navigating intense obstacles, on every single show, I have probably mentioned being present in the moment, being in the experience. Because one of the things can happen in incredibly intense times is that we move into a stressed state and there's no relief, where our system is just getting burned out on high cortisol or the stress hormone, and we're not in the moment. And that can make the whole collapse more likely to happen. And being stressed over an extended period of time makes it much harder to navigate the situation. Being in the present moment is an essential part of navigating challenges, because there can still be moments of beauty in whatever challenge is happening if we are actually in our bodies. The first thing that comes to mind for me is my yoga practice has been a constant companion since I was a young teenager. And there has been so many times in my life where I've gone to my yoga practice as a resource, as a sanctuary, because pretty much every single time I step onto my yoga mat, I feel better afterwards. But the key challenge to avoid is the self-sabotage in challenges, because sometimes people can get in the habit of, when hard things are happening, they take worse care of themselves. It's like they're punishing themselves, or they go into a self-sabotage cycle. Being in the present moment is being with the breath, moving the body, taking good care of yourself. Even though you're facing challenges, it will put you in a better state of navigating being in the challenge and restoring your system once you have come out of it. Is allowing still the simple pleasures of a hot shower at the end of the day, or soft sheets on your skin at night, or the feeling of the cool breeze, or the warm sun, or your cup of coffee or your tea, or the smell of a meal, or the simple pleasures help to recharge our system, and for us to remember that not everything is awful always, right? Even in a challenge, there can be glimpses of enjoyment, or at least neutral energy. It's much easier in hindsight to see how challenges or obstacles led us down a different road and shaped our lives. In general, it can be really hard to see while it's happening. When you're in a challenge, if you have the ability to remember past experiences where an intense event or an obstacle opened a pathway that you never would have imagined, or you met a person, or you made a life choice that really changed your life for the better, and it came from a challenging event, this can be incredibly powerful to remember, because it's much harder to do while it's happening. To see how this life-changing, challenging event is going to shape your life in the positive. So seeing how these threads are woven together and knowing that the more that you can stay in the embodied experience of working with the energy, working with your own emotions, the easier it becomes to stay in the experience and navigate the challenges with less resistance, with greater ease, with greater curiosity. An example for this for me was, interestingly enough, so I live in Sedona, Arizona now, and many years ago I was at the gem show in Tucson, which happens every year in February. And I had a camping van, and the camping van was completely loaded up to go on a several month road trip, as well as I was at the gem show. And I had a bunch of supplies that I had purchased in my van. I went to a yoga class. As I was pulling up to the yoga studio, my guidance told me to park in front. And I didn't listen to the guidance because I needed to change my clothes in the van to change into yoga clothes. So I pulled behind the studio and parked my van. After I came out of the yoga class, my van was gone. It was stolen. It was an incredibly challenging time because everything was in my van. All my ID, my credit cards, my money. The only thing I had taken into the yoga studio was $20, a water bottle, and a yoga mat. At the time, I was living in California. So when I came out, all I had, because the van was stolen, was the yoga mat, the water bottle, and $5 because I'd paid for the class. And I didn't have ID and I didn't have money. So I couldn't get on a plane to get home, and I couldn't rent a car because I didn't have ID. This was an incredible challenge in my life, literally a life-changing event, because it triggered an enormous amount of my trauma, but it also changed the path of my life going forward. That day, I had been looking at travel trailers to pull behind the van, which my plan was to sell my condo, move into the travel trailer, and travel around the United States. Well, then the van was stolen, and so I decided to move overseas and to teach yoga in Asia. So instead of going on the road with the van and the travel trailer, because the van was stolen and luckily I hadn't bought a travel trailer, I took a job teaching yoga in Asia. I put everything into storage and I went to Asia for most of 4 years after that. That was one of those intense challenges that path I wasn't even looking at leaving the country, but all of a sudden my life changed so radically that other possibilities opened. And it was devastating. It was also a massive battle with my insurance company to get things covered, which luckily there was insurance, full coverage on the insurance. There was full coverage for everything that was in the van, but it was a massive battle. It was like 6 months worth of work to get the money back, to be able to go on with my life. But it was one of those events that now, many years later, I can look back and see that the path that I ended up on wasn't even in my awareness. And it's very unlikely that I would have ended up in Asia had my van not been stolen. It's one of those experiences that it was incredibly stressful. It was really devastating. It totally knocked me off my game for months. Yet it opened a path that I didn't even know was possible. If you're in an incredibly challenging time in your life, it's important to take from this episode what you can implement. The main thing is to recognize if you are feeling powerless or victimized by your situation, is to move into a state of reclaiming your power, recognizing what is possible for you to do, not pretending that it isn't hard, but acknowledging this is really hard and I want the best possible outcome for me and for anyone else who is involved. If you're in a state of reflecting back on intense things that have happened, then you have a different perspective. I also think we can use this idea in relationship to the collective. What if this is happening for us? If we look at the intense things that are happening in the world, not that we want them to be happening, but to look for ways that we can use the intensity of things that are happening to shape the life, the path, the collective experience for humanity in going forward. Thank you for being a part of our community. I am honored to support your embodied spiritual awakening. Are you ready for a personalized rites of passage with me? The Embodied Soul Purpose series focuses on integrating parts of you that were lost along the way in a soul retrieval process and an activation of all 7 main energy centers. Embrace all aspects of your past in order to create the greatest chapter of your life going forward, no matter what your current age. For more information, visit sedonasoulsisters.com/soul. Leave a review and follow on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, breathe gently, listen to your guidance, and create miracles.